This is Billy Dees, and this is the Billy Dees Podcast. Welcome to the program. If you are new here, let me tell you, we are primarily an interview and a commentary podcast. We're going to be talking about a few things today, and all that is coming up. You can find the Billy Dees Podcast pretty much anywhere podcasts are found, including with our friends over at Goodpods. If you haven't had a chance yet, if you are a podcast listener, and I know you are, you might want to check out the Goodpods app available in your app store. A couple of things. First of all, I can't believe, I simply cannot believe that this is December 13th. And the end of the year is right around the corner, and I don't know where another year has gone. But typically, this time of year, sometimes we reflect on some of the things that have happened in the past year. And I'm going to talk a little bit when I say politics, not partisan, but in terms of politicians. We had a couple of notable passings this past year, and I'm kind of wondering if a certain era of a certain type of statesman is passing away as well. How sad is that? We're going to talk a little bit about that. And also, I'm going to follow up on the Alec Baldwin movie set tragedy where the shooting happened. We dedicated a good part of one of our last podcasts about that story, so I'm going to follow up a little bit with that as well. Just a couple of programming notes here. Sometimes the holidays can be somewhat difficult to navigate for most of us in the broadcast industry, the podcast industry, what have you, because naturally people get busy on the holidays. Their normal schedules get disrupted. And that's a big part of podcast listening. You're on your way to work or you're having your lunch or whatever, and you listen to your favorite podcast. At the same time, there have been times when I have had spikes in listens during the holidays. And on most podcast apps, for one reason or another, we are classified, the Billy Dees Podcast is classified under news and information. Now, I don't know about news per se, but obviously we're very topical here. We talk about current books and with authors and so on and so forth. We'll have commentary about various things going on in the news. Sometimes I'll have a guest host and we'll tackle a lot of these topics. And I really feel that it is important to maintain a regular schedule through the holiday season. You also may have noticed that we don't do seasons here, season 1, season 2. And I understand why some programs do. They simply have a serial aspect to them. It's a different type of programming. In our case, I feel that the part of the brand of the Billy Dees Podcast is that we are here. Okay. Now, with that being said, the holiday season or a holiday season can be a good time to try some new things. I'm not exactly sure what we're going to do next week. We might have one of our social media live type events. The other thing we might do is a Twitter space. And if you don't know what a Twitter space is, it's this new thing called social audio. Okay. And you might know of Clubhouse. Clubhouse was really big earlier this year. And I believe Spotify has a version of it, Green Room or something like that. And there's other talk of maybe LinkedIn, Facebook following suits with their own version. Now, one of the reasons why I feel Twitter Spaces is going to have an advantage is that just like in the case of podcasting, where there are very topical things that podcasters talk about, whether it be current events or new books or politics or what have you, there is a trending real-time aspect to Twitter with a built-in audience already of hundreds of millions of people. It's not like, starting a new app and you have to bring these people in. They're already there. So what we have been doing here is I've been getting the I've been doing some technical things to figure out what the best way is to manage this. I'm kind of a particular person about how I want to do things technically. And then there's probably the more important issue of how to manage the content. What kind of a program are we going to do? And you will have the option of listening to it live as a Twitter space. And then I'm probably going to take that recorded program, edit it or polish it up a little bit, and present it right here on the program. So there's a kind of some fun things that are going on that we are doing here. I kind of wanted to bring that to your attention. And don't forget, you can follow me on Twitter at Billy Dees. Real easy to find, at Billy Dees. And that's pretty much my screen name on all of my social media platforms. Don't get cute with one name here, one name there. Billy Dees is how you want to do the search. All right. Are we closing in on an era that is about to end of what we might consider to be statesmen as politicians? And I'll tell you, recently, Bob Dole, he was a senator from Kansas. I believe he was senator from 1969 to 1996. He had various roles there in the Senate. And he was a World War II veteran, badly wounded, badly injured in World War II in his service. And several weeks prior to that, Colin Powell, who was the Secretary of State, he also passed away. Now, let me tell you my kind of take on these two gentlemen. Now, there may be things that these guys have said or done that you don't agree with. All right. But by my estimation, these were guys who believed in their country. And the things they did, they believed were the best things for the country. And you might disagree with what you felt was the best thing for the country as opposed to what they did. But the difference now is politicians are doing what they feel is best for them. What is going to get them reelected? What is going to raise them to the national stage so that while they're in office or out of office, they're going to get those high-paying speaking gigs. They're going to get those book contracts. They're going to get a real high-paying job in the private sector when their quote-unquote public service has run its course. These guys, Bob Dole, you could tell when he spoke, had a love of the country, and I just don't mean the soil. They had a love of the American people, of the American spirit. Colin Powell the same way. When he talked about Reagan and some of the other leaders that he knew throughout the years, you could tell he had this almost a reverence for people who served the greater good in terms of what this country could be, not only for the citizens that are in it, but as a world leader. And I'll tell you, as the past number of years has gone on, and my communication, let's say, either because of directly or indirectly from the podcast on social media and other things with people around the world, I don't believe that there's too much question that to some degree the United States is still considered a leader, a symbol of freedom. And I'm not sure how much, it's not just words. These are things that make the world a better place because of these types of values. Okay? And these guys were statesmen. And a couple of things I want to point out about some of the recent talk about elections, the midterms next year, and the next presidential election. Some of the names that come up in politics across the board, whether it be state politics or what have you. I'm hearing Matthew McConaughey. I'm hearing Dr. Oz. I'm hearing Herschel Walker. I'm hearing The Rock. And these are popular figures, and I'm not saying by any shape or form that they're bad people. But are these the people that we should be choosing for statesmen? And I know a lot of people say, well, in terms of the Constitution and the other documents around our country, the qualifications for president of the United States are fairly limited. I believe it's 35 years old. Correct me if I'm wrong. And you have to be born in this country, and it's not going to be long before people find fault with that. Okay, but we as a people, the collective wisdom of our country, we always demanded a certain more. Okay. There were people who were respected politicians. Even JFK served his country during World War II. He served in Congress. He was a public figure in terms of leadership prior to running for president. Reagan, a lot of his detractors will often say, well, he was just an actor. No, that's not fair. Okay. Reagan was an actor, but by the time he ran for the United States presidency, that was his acting credits were pretty much at the bottom of his resume. Okay. And he was very active in business and politics after his acting career. Not the least of his accomplishments was being governor of the state of California, which I believe at the time, and of course today, is the largest economy within the United States. Okay. Although it's almost in spite of themselves, they seem to be driving people out of California to other states. But for the time being, they are the largest economy within the United States. And I'm pretty sure when Reagan was in there, if they weren't the biggest, they were at pretty near the top. So by the time he rolled into the presidency, his cred as a statesman was pretty well in place. All right. He wasn't relying on some pop culture popularity to get elected. And when I say we as a people, we had the wisdom, we had the collective wisdom to demand more of our potential presidents than just existing. That is, they are of a certain age. They are a natural citizen, and I believe there's a residency requirement as well. Are we demanding much more than that as a electorate, as a population, our collective wisdom? Do we demand more than just that? Do we want our leaders to be knowledgeable statesmen who have a basic knowledge of world events and world relations? Or are we basically playing a very high stakes game of American Idol? Okay. Which leader is going to sing the songs that we like? Who's going to play our requests? Who's going to sing us a nice, sweet tune? And if that's the case, what kind of potential leaders of the future are we grooming for these positions? So often I hear, this is the best we have. Somebody will look over a panel of candidates and say, this is the best we've got. Well, does the best, that is people who understand the world of the sciences and politics of the world and different cultures, and somebody who has spent a lot of time not only studying those things, but living them, are those kind of people going to be attracted to a position that seemingly people don't care about those things? To understand those things and to dissect them takes time. It's a very nuanced process. We want the easy song and dance. We want the guy or the woman that makes us smile and tells us the things that we want to hear. Who wants to spend time with a lot of facts and learning stuff and understanding the issues? Who wants to do that? Another point I would like to make about the electorate is I often hear, why so many negative ads? Negative ads all the time. All they do is bash each other. Well, here's the deal. They spend hundreds of millions of dollars on those ads. And they don't do it because they're mean. And they certainly don't do it because those ads don't work. They do it because those ads work. We as an electorate, we respond to that. We respond to, that's the guy I don't like. And consequently, we now have elections that are essentially based on the anti-vote. Which guy or woman do I dislike the most? So I'm going to go in there. I'm going to vote against the person that I know I don't want to be president. That to me is very alarming. And in this last election, objectively speaking, whether you're a Joe Biden guy or not, you cannot ignore the fact that he won largely on the anti-Trump vote. I'm not sure that Joe Biden would have won that election on a pro-Biden vote. And actually, over the past number of years, there's been very few of them. In 1984, Reagan clearly won on a pro-Reagan vote. 1992, Bill Clinton clearly won on a pro-Clinton vote. 2008, President Obama clearly won on a pro-Obama vote. But for the most part, to varying degrees, it's been the anti-vote that has carried the election, and certainly the last two. President Trump likewise won largely based on an anti-Hillary vote. So we don't have leaders that have the cred, let's say, as statesmen, but that's only part of it. Their platform, therefore, becomes, don't vote for me because I'm so wonderful. Vote for me because the other candidate is even worse. Even worse. You most certainly don't want them. You better vote for me. How can you have a positive impact as a leader when that's how the choices are being made?
You are listening to the Billy Dees Podcast.
All right, I wanted to take a few moments and follow up on the commentary that I did analyzing some of the situations that involve firearms on a movie set. And in that commentary, we talked, of course, about the horrible tragedy where a firearm was discharged on set that ended up killing Alina Hutchins, a cinematographer, and wounding Joel Souza on the set of the movie Rust. And this involved the actor Alec Baldwin. And here again, if you are new to the program here, my take on that was simply analyzing some variables. I almost never adopt an ideological point of view, especially based on politics, and use a situation like this to smear someone I don't like. And by the same token, you shouldn't be defending anyone in this situation based on their political point of views. Alec Baldwin is also somewhat of a political person. If you support him because of his beliefs politically, you shouldn't be defending this out of hand either. We shouldn't be doing any of these things. We need to let the facts play out. Now, with that being said, he went on primetime TV and had an interview with George Stephanopoulos. And there were a couple things that he said during that interview that any number of them actually that grabbed people's attention, but most notably, by my estimation, was he made the comment that he did not pull the trigger, and we're going to talk about that for a moment. And we're also going to talk about the fact that he stated that he feels no guilt per se about what happened. Now, first, he did not pull the trigger. This is the context of that. He says that the gun discharged. He was being instructed on how to aim the camera to get the most dramatic shot of, his face and the gun, and the camera's being fixed on him. And he was being instructed, raise it a little bit, lower it a little bit, tilt your head a little bit, and get that in frame the way that the director wanted it. And he says during that time he had the hammer pulled back, and he released the hammer and the gun went off, but he never actually pulled the trigger. Now, there have been some gun experts on television and other places online and so forth who have said that this is unlikely because when these replicas of Old West firearms, when you pull the hammer back, there's several different notches that hammer engages as the cylinder is turned. And if you release it, it may not fall. And if it did, it wouldn't fall enough to hit the firing pin. This may or may not be true. My experience with guns is that if you pull the hammer back, you better let it down very gently if you don't want that gun to go off. But that's being extra careful. Okay. The big question, according to Alec Baldwin, and I would totally agree with this, is how did a live round make its way into the gun? Which kind of brings up another little sticking point. Apparently, some people did leave the production. Some people apparently did make some reports that safety procedures were not being followed. All right. And he got a little, I didn't hear anything like that. Everything was fine with everybody I talked to. Everybody was having a great time. Now, I don't know. It's hard to say. I wasn't there. But I can tell you, typically when people walk off a job, regardless of what it is, a movie set or a construction site or whatever, they're not particularly happy about something. All right. And to be that flippant and dismiss it out of hand that everybody he talked to was just fine and dandy. I mean, there's a lot of things. This is all conjecture. I mean, obviously he might be, preparing to head off some legal things that are going to be happening sometime in the future. But I found that a little disingenuous, quite frankly. It didn't come across to me. Take the logical side of this aside. If you go back and really critically watch that part of the interview, there's just something about the aura of that didn't hit me very well. And here again, it might be 100% true. I don't know, but it just seems out of skew. The other thing is, I feel no guilt. What happened is that George Stephanopoulos asked him, and I'm paraphrasing here, but something like, with all that's happened, the enormous tragedy, the loss of life, do you feel any guilt at all about what happened? And his answer was basically, no, I don't, because the real issue is, and he goes on to this, well, how did a live round get in there? And I did exactly what I was instructed to do. And he might very well have. The real issue is, yes, absolutely. How did a live round make its way onto the set? Now, I have a suspicion that there was some plinking going on in the desert during off hours. That's probably what happened. And somebody somewhere was doing things they weren't supposed to be doing, and some live rounds ended up in the gun. But that's pure conjecture on my part. I would have to say that there's been some people, make the assertion that maybe it was sabotage. I'm going to have to say that's very unlikely. If you were trying to sabotage something like this by putting a live round in the gun. If safety procedures, the way I normally understand them, happen on a movie set, it would be unlikely that it would result in a fatal accident anyway. Okay. So the idea that some diabolical sabotage was done to cause this, I'm going to have to say is probably not the case. It was probably some sort of carelessness. And there was probably some shenanigans going on during off hours involving those firearms is probably what the case is. However, we don't know. And here again, we need to let the investigation bear itself out. But getting back to his comment, is that something that's appropriate to say? Now, here again, in the terms of legalese, I suppose we could say that you don't want to admit any type of guilt, whether it be guilt as in taking on the responsibility for the incident or just feeling guilty as an emotion. You want to stay away from that word. All right. But quite frankly, I would have to have stated it differently. One of the things that I probably would have pointed out would be, let's say you're in a very bad automobile accident. You're in this big pileup. Okay. And after the police sort out all the facts and they do all the measurements and the skid marks and the impact assessments, they determine that you were not at fault. You were simply caught up in a bad situation. All right. But the human side of this would be, okay, the police determined that I was not the direct cause of the accident. Okay. But as I'm going through this, as I'm replaying the event over and over again, could I have maybe been more aware of what was happening around me sooner? Maybe I would have stepped on the brake a half a second sooner. Or maybe I would have dodged left instead of dodging right. And there would be that humanistic wonderment. Could I have avoided this tragedy? Guilt or fault aside, that would have been how I would have framed it. To simply say very, I'm not sure what the word was. No, I feel none. To say it that matter of factly, it was a bit odd. I have to say it was just a bit odd. Objectively, he was asked, do you feel that charges are going to come up? Here again, this is pure conjecture on my part. I would have to say that charges against him committing some sort of a deliberate act or reckless act, given that he was handed the firearm by an on-set prop person, an armor, as they call it. And he was instructed what to do with that firearm by the director on camera. I'm going to have to say charges against him are probably unlikely. What's probably more likely is somebody in that chain is going to be charged with some sort of negligent homicide, some sort of negligence in terms of manslaughter for what happened. Either way, this is something that, by my estimation, should have never happened. By my estimation, being in charge of a set like that, no one touches those guns. No one touches the blanks. No one manipulates anything. And most of all, live ammunition is nowhere near within miles of that set. And with the proper protocols that I discussed in the last episode of how firearms in general are manipulated on a set, I don't know how this ever happened. I can tell you that, these Civil War enactors, my dad was a big Civil War expert, and we used to go to Gettysburg and all these other places. And by the way, that's a part of history that you should experience on some level. It really is a very interesting part of our country's history. But there would be these reenactors all the time, hundreds of people running around firing blanks, cannons, firing these huge blanks. All right. And I was never at one of these events. Somebody got shot. Okay, this isn't that complicated by my estimation to do this safely, especially in this day and age of all these special effects, all these practical effects that are computer controlled, and any number of different things. I don't understand how this happened. So let's let the investigation bear itself out. The interview with George Stephanopoulos, I would guess, is online if you missed it. Pretty interesting event in the way that it's being talked about and the way that it's handled, and especially with what's been happening on social media. And I talked a little bit about that in my last podcast, but interesting phenomenon in the news, to say the least. All right. I am Billy Dees, and that's going to do it for our podcast. Don't forget, stay with us. We're going to maintain our regular schedule in terms of frequency through the holiday season. There's some really, really cool stuff coming up in the weeks ahead. Some great interviews. We're going to be doing some great things online. So definitely follow me on Twitter at Billy Dees. You can also find the Billy Dees Podcast on Facebook and YouTube. Thank you very much, and I will be talking to you again next week. Well, hello everyone. I am Billy Dees from the self-titled Billy Dees Podcast. You can find me on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and many more of the best podcast networks. Join me for my commentary and interviews. Follow me on Twitter, real easy to find, at Billy Dees. I am Billy Dees. I'd love to have you listen in.